if I could just make all three of these the same length. Hey, this is John Young here. Today we're going to be talking about going and making cuts with saws in wood and getting a consistent outcome. And what I mean by that is that many times, say we have 3 pieces of wood. I'm using 3 small pieces because it's easier to demonstrate. And we want to have all 3 pieces the same length. And that sometimes can be difficult. If you're doing a project, say if you're going to be doing a stand, and you have 4 legs to the stand, and you want to have all 4 legs be the same height, that you go and you measure and you mark, and sometimes it turns out that they're exactly right, and sometimes not so much. We're going to go through just a few tips and things to be keeping in mind as you are making your marks and making your cuts, so you can have consistent outcomes. First off, you need to be kind of aware with tape measures. There's a couple of things. You've got your traditional tape measure, nothing fancy with this particular one, but with the end of a tape measure, there should be some movement back and forth. This will move, in this case, the thickness back and forth of the little blade. So when I'm measuring by pushing up against something, it will be accurate, and when I'm hooking on something and pulling, it will be accurate. Now that's kind of an important thing, because sometimes you will have a tape measure that doesn't do that. That it's maybe the rivets have been hammered, jammed, whatever, and it doesn't have movement on it. And I measure with one, and then I go to a second tape measure, or maybe I do the first cut with this tape measure and the second one is a different, whatever. First off, use the same tape measure for measuring your first one all the way through. That would certainly be it. But even for applications where you're going to be measuring and such, make sure you're consistent and you have one that's functioning properly, because if this was staying, wouldn't move, and I go and measure, and then I go measure and cut, it's going to give me, I would be off by roughly a 1/16 of an inch. Secondly, is when you're measuring and you're making your marks, you're going to hook on, pull, and you're going to make your mark where you want to make your mark. Make a fine, the mark as fine as possible. And what do I mean by that? Let's take a look at a couple of options what people use when marking their boards. So traditionally, a lot of people have seen these. These are carpenter pencils or construction pencils, whatever you want to have, whatever you want to refer to them as. And take a look at that. That little, there's your kind of your lead from the pencil. Pencil, good. This particular one for fine cuts and such, probably not so good. If you're doing something where you're cutting studs or you're making big marks across plywood, and it's not needed to be within that 1/8 of an inch accuracy, this is probably fine. If you're re-roofing and you're going to be throwing sheeting on roofing, this is probably what you want to do. If you're doing fine cuts, such as on our smaller boards like this, where I want them to be accurate, I want to use a pencil like this. And I'll show you on the board what the difference is. Another thing people will sometimes use is a marker or an ink pen. Never do that. We'll show you in a little bit why that is in the video, but this marker, ink pen, throw it away. If you're going to be doing some metal, this is a possibility, but if anything where you're going to, watch the video a little bit later, we'll be digging into these. So let's take a look at making a square line across our board. If we're going to be using a hand saw of some sort, we want to be able to draw a line across so we can follow that line. So if we're going to be doing that, I'm going to do 2 lines. One, I've got the pencil, a regular, just a number 2 pencil. I'm going to make a nice line with that, and then I'm going to slide down a little bit. I'm going to make a second line with our construction pencil. Now first off, if you can see right there, there's a little bit of a gap between the line and where the actual, where I actually have my little square. This is a quick square here. Now I'm gonna actually go up a little bit where there's not a line, and I'm gonna use my pencil, and I'm going to draw. And you can see that it's much closer when I use the pencil. Secondly, is we look at the lines, and when I'm using my pencil, especially if it's sharpened, it's not bad. It's not super sharp. If I have it sharpened, I can get a super fine line, and my construction pencils got just a little bit wider. These can get, these get sharpened with a knife of some sort, utility knife, what have you. These can get dull, blunt, and give you a wider line than you need. But the biggest thing is that line wasn't down as tight as you would like it to be, because it's kind of rounded over as it's been used a ton of times. I'm not going to get as accurate with this as I will with this. Secondly, is when I'm going to cut this, let's say I've measured and I've marked and we'll just look at this middle line. That's the one I want to cut. Now I've measured from the bottom to where I'm going to put I made my little, let's actually just kind of do it for you here. We'll do it up above. So I made a little mark that here is going to be right there. That's where I want it to be, at the tip of the V. Generally when I'm measuring and I'm marking, I will make a little V like that, a little arrow, and put it so I have the tip is the mark point. Then I will put my square so it's just right there to the tip, and then I can draw my line, and then it's right through that. Now this particular situation, I've got that line, I've got it right where I want it to be, and now I have to decide if I'm going to leave, if I'm going to go zip down the line, if I'm going to take the whole line, or what I'm going to do. When I'm doing this, basically what I want to do is I want to line up the saw blade so that I'm going to basically bisect the line, or if I'm going to do anything, I'm going to be taking the line. But in most of the cases, I'm going to try to bisect the line with the saw. Let me kind of show you now. There's a couple of ways to do this to get a more accurate cut when it comes to that. Now when we start talking saws, we've got the old reliable, the one that the shop teacher had, the old hand saw. It can do a variety of different things. The problem with this is when we're trying to cut, you might have some tipping going on. You can obviously support it. If you're not experienced using a hand saw like this, and I know it sounds weird, but a carpenter who uses these on a regular basis or has been brought up and can cut well with these can make these do incredible things. For most of us, we only make 2 or 3 cuts a year, and if we're using something like this, if you're trying to make something square, it might be best to use something else, or to maybe have some sort of support to help keep this square and straight. Now the neat thing about this is look at how fine, or is that, I want to show you how narrow, that curve is very, very, very narrow. It's not very wide at all. You see that there's the teeth. There's a tooth that kind of goes to the left, then a tooth that goes to the right. That creates the curve, so as you're cutting through the board, it makes it a little bit wider so that it doesn't bind when the rest of the saw goes through. All saws have that, where they have the teeth that are going left and right to give you that curve. This doesn't have a very wide curve. Let's take a look at a circular saw blade. This is a standard circular saw blade that's just kind of a construction one, and I want to show you that. You can see the teeth go both directions, and it is, if you go from side to side, it's probably pushing, oh, I don't know, at least a good strong 1/8 inch, maybe looking at maybe 3/16 of a wide curve. Now this is more of a finishing blade, but it also has the same teeth going back and forth, but it's a little narrower curve on this particular saw. Let's take a look at one on a saw. Now on a lot of our cordless saws, they actually make this is a 6.5 inches, this is just a DeWalt, no battery by the way, because you don't mess around with saws that have battery or plugged in. But this is actually a narrower curve yet. This one is going to give us about an 1/8 of an inch curve, if that. The teeth again going both directions. This is more of a finishing type cut. It's not the really big teeth that you would see on a construction one where you're just ripping 2x4s or you're cross-cutting 2x4s. This will give you a little bit nicer cut, maybe not quite as aggressive or quite as fast, but this is a really nice one for this saw. But it's a narrow curve. Why does the curve matter? Well, when we're trying to go and make that cut and be as accurate as possible, if you don't line things up properly, that curve might be the difference between 2 boards being the same length in the cut. So we look at this blade again. If I line up my little line, and I mentioned I wanted to kind of bisect the line. If I'm having the board here and I have the line here, I want to line up that piece that I'm going to my line. I want to line it up on the left side of the blade, because that makes it so I can hold the piece of wood and I can see that the line is being bisected as I go through and cut. I want to line it up on my side of the blade, let's call it, but the left side. Some people will go and they will make cuts where sometimes it'll be on the right side of the blade, or they'll go right down the middle of the line. That's where the width of the curve is going to give you some issues. It might be that that curve is 3/16 wide. It's a bigger, wider blade, and as you wobble back and forth, you're going to be off on the length of your cut. So then you get to the end, you're like, oh, now I got to go and trim to fix. Obviously, a smaller, a narrower curve blade is going to not show up as much if you do it wrong and you're not consistent. But the idea is you want to make that line and then be consistent with that cut, and really all the time. Some people will go and they will take the line, some people will kind of scratch the line, and some people will be beyond the line. You know, everyone's got their method. You have to be consistent and figure it out. Myself, again, I want to bisect the line so that there's just a little bit there and I know that I've hit right on. So we talked a little bit about the curve in the saw. Now, how do we get a square cut? Let's take a look at some boards. So first off, when you're going to do a project and you've got a board that you purchased at your local big box store or lumberyard, they look like they're pretty square on the ends, and most of the time they probably are close. But not always. Sometimes when you put the little square to them, and this one's repurposed, but sometimes when you put the little square on them, you'll see that they're just about, you know, this one's just off a little bit, because right there, that should be, let's see, that would be, so you can see that this one is not perfectly square. So ideally, the first thing you're going to do is you want to go and cut one end and make it as square as possible. A miter saw, which I'll show you in just a little bit, is your preferred tool for this, because that is, once you have it set, is almost guaranteed to be square. But if I don't have a miter saw, I'm going to show you how to use this. Once I've squared one end, then I can measure my board, I can make my mark, draw the line across just as a reference line, and then I can go to make my cut. Let me kind of show you how that would work. So for our example, I'll just draw that, or put a line here. I'm going to put a line at about 12 inches that I want, right there. Yes, that's about 12 inches, right on the nose. So I want to cut that right at 12 inches. So I know that my little arrow that I made is right at the corner of that arrow is where the 12 inches are. I should sharpen this and have it a little sharper, but for this example, you'll get the idea here. Then I can take my little speed square, I can line it up with that corner of that, and I can draw the line. Okay, so now this particular one, because I'm kind of doing it at an angle and I'm not looking at it, if you can see, I just missed where I want to be. So in this particular case, I'm going to want to leave that line. I want to see that whole line, and that will give me my 12 inches. Again, it's construction and woodwork is part art, part science. Now I could take this, and let me grab my saw. I could take this and just hold my saw and line it up, and some have lasers in them. I don't believe this one does. And make the cut, but I don't like that. Because I could wobble and not cut straight. So I can use my little speed square, and I can go and figure out the distance from the edge of my blade right here to the edge of the frame. So in this case, measuring from the left side of the blade, put our little tape measure there, to that we are at an inch and 1/8 right there to go from the edge of the blade to that. So that means we would have to put that little square 1 1/8 inches over to get that left edge of the blade running exactly where we want it. And then I can measure over so I can go and cut that. Or if I want to do it on the fly more, I can go and get it kind of set close, run my saw up and see where it's hitting. I want to go just a little beyond it and see, okay, well, I'm not quite to the line, I can adjust over. And then what I'm doing is once I get it, so I'm, in this case, adjusting, so I'm going to leave the line, would be right about there. That's where I would be cutting. And then I can run the saw against this little square and have a nice straight cut. So I'll be able to run the saw right along the square and have that nice cut, and everything would be good to go. And then when I'm done, I would have my consistent, perfect 12-inch piece in this particular case. Now that might seem like a lot of messing around, but it will work for you and give you a nice square cut. Let's take a look at what a miter saw would do with this particular situation and a couple of things with that. So I've got a little scrap piece of wood here on our compound miter saw here from Craftsman, or this would be a sliding miter saw, depending upon where you're coming from and what you're talking about. Now, with a miter saw, you don't have to do things quite the same as you do with a hand saw. You don't have to draw the line all the way across, but you can. And I wanted to show you a couple of things with that. So we're just going to draw, first off, we're going to just take our pencil. It's got not the sharpest, but there's a line there. Now, one thing people sometimes do is they want to use an ink pen or a marker. So we're going to use a marker here. I want to show you the difference here on what a marker can do to this. Is even though this is considered a Sharpie, a fine point kind of a fine point. It's not the super fine, or it's a medium point, whatever these are. But you can see by looking at it is that my pencil mark, while not super sharp, is still finer than the marker. With the marker, if I measure this and I have this set to, like, say 24 inches, and I do the marker, the question becomes is the marker seeping over, and it's a little fatter there and it's a little maybe thinner, as ink or marker will soak into the wood. So you may not be getting a true cut each and every time. Now with a miter saw compound, I can actually go and I could put a little tally here, put a little X here, and knowing that maybe say that the point is where I want it to be. And then when we drop the blade, we can line up. I wonder if I can move this out of the way so you guys can see it a little bit better. It's not plugged in or anything, so we're not going to hear it. I can go and I can get the blade set. So I'm making I can put the little line on the left side. So the drop off or fall off is going to come here, and I'm going to have from the edge of the board the 24 inches in to this mark. And for a compound miter or a miter saw that has the bed and everything like this, I only need to have one point, and then I can go and be consistent with that. If I have the line, I obviously can move over and I can line the line up on that. And again, I'm going to go with the left edge of the line on the left edge of the blade. If you take a look at your saw blades, you'll see one tooth that's kind of got favoring the right side, one that's the left. That's going to give us that kerf, that width. And I want to go and find that tooth that is kind of to the left and line that up with the left edge of my pencil mark, and that will give me a consistent cut from board to board. Now, if I go over to the marker, the problem I have with the marker is because some spots it's a little wider and some spots it's not, and it's soaked in. Now, if I were going to be doing something where I wanted to stain and such, that ink or marker is in the wood. I can easily sand a pencil out. In some cases, I can actually go and I can erase a pencil mark in wood very, very well, but I can't do that with ink or marker. So you definitely don't want to use those when it comes to marking your boards. And if you have the miter saw, there's some things you just makes it a little bit easier. So that's kind of a look at how you can go and make consistent cuts. Be aware that the kerf, that where you're going to be on the line, so you can be consistent. If you need to take the line, if you need to scratch the line, bisect the line, whatever, be aware of that. Don't just make lines and go helter-skelter. Having a sharp pencil is going to give you a much better cut and performance in marking. And don't be afraid to use a little speed square to help give your circular saw a straighter edge for cutting. This is John Young. Thank you for watching, and hopefully that helps when you're going to be doing your next project.
For more tips and how-to videos, go to weekendhandyman.com.